The Measure of Quiet Water, Episode 8, Water After Lamplight. On the long table in Amara Day's survey house, the village water had become blue ink. It began at Cloud Step Spring in the upper right corner of the largest sheet, past the oval of the settling bowl, and narrowed through the upper measure before reaching the dark three-pointed mark of the divide. From there it traveled in lines of different widths among pale shapes for walls, terraces, lanes, and houses. The eastern line stepped through rosemary, thyme, and sage. The central line curved past Mint Bend and into Hearthchistern. The western branch crossed the long descent to Fennel Reach. All three found their relations again below the square, passing Lavender End before the last thin line opened into the green-washed reeds of the resting pool. Amara had drawn every measured length to scale. She had marked every gate, spillway, settling bowl, cistern, and stone lip. Fine numerals stood beside changes in fall. Small arrows showed the customary direction of flow. Dotted blue lines recorded buried passages beneath lanes and courtyard paving. In the lower corner she had ruled a key so exact that even the spaces between its symbols matched. The map was accurate. It was also, she had begun to understand, unfinished. Morning light entered through the east window and disclosed the grain of the paper. The sheet had been made in the village from linen scraps and reed fiber, and its surface rose in faint ridges beneath the ink. Where Amara's pen had crossed one of those ridges, the line broadened almost too little to see. She ran a clean finger beside the course from Mint Bend to Hearthcistern without touching it. For 3 evenings she had reviewed the drawing against her field books. Each figure agreed. Each reach connected properly to the next. Yet the map still seemed to describe a system empty of the people who used it. She moved 7 chairs around the table. The survey house had rarely held 7 visitors at once. It was one broad room with shelves along 2 walls, a washstand, the long table, and a narrow desk beneath the west window. Gauges hung from pegs in ascending length. Rolls of earlier plans rested in labeled pigeonholes. A cabinet held inks, string, spare gate markers, chalk, and the small tools needed for adjusting instruments. Beside the back wall, the listening channel passed through an open stone trough before disappearing under the lane toward Mint Bend. Its low voice lay beneath every other sound in the room. Amara opened both shutters. Cool air brought mint from the shaded beds and the warmer, sharper scent of thyme from above. She set stones at the corners of the map, placed pencils and small slips of paper within reach of every chair, and put her field books on the sill rather than on the table. That last choice required more thought than it should have. The first knock was Surya's elbow against the open door. Her hands were occupied by a round tray bearing a teapot, 8 cups, and a cloth-covered bowl. "If this is the final map," Surya said, "it ought to survive breakfast. The ink is dry. I was thinking of the map makers." She set the tray on the washstand, safely distant from the paper, and uncovered a bowl of small fennel biscuits. Steam lifted from the pot with the scents of lemon balm and bruised mint. Amara had prepared pencils, blotting cloths, spare paper, and 2 kinds of ink. She had not prepared tea. Surya poured the first cup and put it at the empty place nearest the listening channel. "That one can cool for you," she said. "You prefer it after it has stopped being tea in everyone else's opinion." Mira arrived carrying a narrow box of colored pencils and 3 folded notes from customers at the tea house. Thomas followed with a flat mason's board tucked under his arm, explaining that it was useful for supporting paper outdoors and also for discouraging anyone from rolling the map before they had finished with it. Leela brought a sprig each of rosemary, thyme, sage, mint, lemon balm, fennel, and lavender, their stems wrapped in damp cloth. Aaron came with a coil of fine basket fiber and 2 branch cards from the lower terraces. Nico arrived last, not late, bearing the rotation board under one arm and a sharpened pencil behind each ear. They filled the little room without crowding it. Bags went beneath chairs. Thomas leaned his board against the wall. Mira placed her notes beside the colored pencils. Leela arranged the herbs along the windowsill as if setting out a second, fragrant map. Amara remained standing at the head of the table until everyone had found a place. In earlier seasons, she would have begun by explaining the drawing. She would have named its scale, its symbols, and the sources of its measurements before inviting questions at the end. The words waited in their familiar order. She let them wait. "This is the village flow map," she said instead. "It is the final draft only if all of you can use it. I know where the measurements belong. You know what the water is like where you meet it. Today we put both kinds of knowledge on the same paper. Corrections first. Explanations after, if we need them." Nico took one pencil from behind his ear. "Can we write on it? Please do." He looked at the clean sheet, then at Amara. "Directly?" Amara slid the pencil slips toward him. "A slip if you are uncertain, the map itself when you are not." Suri chose a biscuit. "We may be here until winter if you keep asking permission to obey her." Nico smiled, bent over the lower edge of the map, and wrote "rotation board" beside the small square Amara had used for its post. His lettering slanted uphill. It was the first mark on the sheet not made by Amara's hand. Conversation began slowly, then gathered as water did after a gate lifted. Leela found that the upper terrace footpath was shown 2 paces too far east of the sage wall. Thomas added a small culvert beneath the lane above Hearth Kistern, built before Amara had begun surveying and hidden by later paving. Mira marked the side of the square from which a person could read the cistern gauge without standing in the path of household pitchers. Aaron drew a woven symbol beside a low willow screen at Fennel Reach, where branch cards stayed dry in light rain. Suri added the bakehouse oven, not because it touched a channel, but because the smell of bread told people on the early household turn that the cistern had had time to recover after dawn use. Amara nearly asked how many minutes after the oven was lit that recovery usually occurred. Then she remembered the point of the morning and asked a different question. "Is the smell reliable?" "More reliable than the bakehouse clock," Suri said. "The clock loses time whenever Thomas oils it." "It gains character," Thomas said. "It gains 7 minutes." Amara wrote bread and fennel morning recovery in the margin of her field slip. The words looked peculiar beside her columns of depths and intervals. They also named something true. Mira unfolded the notes from the tea house. One customer had reported that the central branch could be heard beneath the fig leaves before it could be seen from the upper lane. Another said the air cooled noticeably at the turn toward Mint Bend. The third, written by a child in large, careful letters, said that the reed resting pool was reached when the frogs sounded close enough to be under one's shoes. There were no frogs beneath the shoes. There were no frogs beneath the shoes, the note added. Seasonal, Aaron said. Useful in spring and early summer. Less so after the dry month. Mira added when frogs are calling and placed the note near the pool. Leela took the thyme sprig from the sill and laid it beside the eastern branch without touching the paper. "This boundary is hard to find from above when the beds have been cut back," she said. "But the thyme changes scent after the little drop. Upstream, the wall holds the morning shade and the leaves stay cool. Downstream, they warm sooner. If you smell warm thyme, you have passed the second gate." Amara looked at the precise gate symbol. A stranger following the map might count walls and still choose the wrong narrow turning. Warm thyme would correct them. "Put it in," she said. Leela wrote in small upright letters. Soon the map held phrases Amara would never have invented. "First silver of water under the fig leaves. Pause here after 3 household buckets. Lavender stronger on the return path. Stone feels cool even at midday. Listen before lifting." Thomas leaned over the reach between the central lower run and the western branch. "You have the fall exactly right here. I measured it twice." "I know. But the easiest landmark is not the fall. He touched a blank place beside a minor bend. No structure was drawn there, only a contour and the blue thread of water. "What is?" Amara asked. "Hook, S408, HDev1. Start." A precise map gained a note that simply said, "Listen for the hollow stone." Thomas printed the words beside the bend while Amara and her neighbors leaned over the shared guide to the channels. The note had no distance, depth, or angle. It referred to a flat limestone slab under which an old pocket in the wall made the current sound deeper than it looked. "You hear it before the turn," Thomas said. "If you see the split alder, you have already gone too far." Amara considered adding the measured distance from the culvert. Instead, she drew a small ear beside his words. "We will test it on the route. If it leads us cleanly, it stays." Later, below the square, Mira heard the low talk through the wall before anyone saw the bend. She stopped at once and pointed to the narrow path hidden behind fennel stems. The measured marker lay beyond sight, but the sound had brought all 7 of them to the correct turning. Back at the map, Amara inked Tomas's phrase exactly as he had written it. "Listen for the hollow stone" remained among the levels and gate marks, not as decoration, but as one of the surest directions on the page. "I pick hook, S4E08H01E end. It will lead us," Aaron said. "That stone announces itself to every basket I carry past it. Then we will hear whether the announcement is clear," Amara replied. By the time the tea had cooled, the map was covered by 23 pencil notes and 9 paper slips. None disputed the main course of a channel. 3 corrected paths. 4 added structures too small or too familiar to have reached Amara's field book, and the rest described ways to recognize a place or wait for a change. Amara drew a route on a separate sheet. They would begin at Cloud Step Spring, check the settling bowl and upper measure, follow the head channel to 3 Lip Divide, take the eastern branch through Saffron Steps, cross by the service path to Mint Bend and Hearth Cistern, then descend the western line through Fennel Reach and Lavender End to Reed Resting Pool. On the return, they would pass the hidden connections below the square and confirm the central household overflow. Every named reach would be seen from its useful approach, not merely from the easiest walking path. She started assigning who would verify each section, then stopped with the pencil above the paper. "Leela leads from the spring through Saffron Steps," she said. "After that, whoever knows the next reach best takes us through it. If 2 of you disagree about who that is, both lead." "And you?" Nico asked. Amara folded the route sheet once and put it into the outer pocket of her satchel. "I carry the map." Suri passed her the cup that had been cooling beside the channel. It was exactly warm enough. Cloud Step Spring emerged from the island's shoulder beneath a shallow cap of stone, clear enough that the pale grains at its bottom appeared enlarged. Mist still rested in the hollow when the group reached it. The village below showed in pieces through the trees. White walls, red roof tiles, strips of green terrace, and a small bright square of sea beyond Lavender End. Leela did not begin at the spring mouth. She led them to the moss-dark stones at the rear of the settling bowl and asked everyone to stand still. "What are we checking?" Nico whispered. "Whether you can hear me if you speak that softly," Suri said. Leela smiled but kept listening. Water entered the bowl with a rounded, unhurried sound. It circled once before passing beneath the low lip into the head channel. A few grains of pale sand moved along the bottom. Nothing clouded the surface. "After wind," Leela said, "needles collect at the spring mouth. After rain, sand collects here. Today there was neither, so the useful first sign is the note. If it is smooth before we look, we know there is no twig held crosswise under the cap." Amara had always looked before listening at Cloudstep. The stone cover made the mouth easy to inspect. Yet with her back turned she could hear the difference Leela meant. The sound contained no thin hiss or irregular tap. She marked an ear beside the settling bowl and wrote smooth note before inspection. They checked the lime marks. The surface rested between them. Nico lifted the small leaf screen. Leela brushed 2 needles from its edge, and Tomas confirmed the bowl's outlet stone sat firm. No work was needed. The absence of repair felt like part of the verification rather than a gap in it. At the upper measure, morning light reached across the marked stone in a narrow band. Amara unfolded her gauge, but Leela put one hand out. First, the dark line, she said. The water had left a soft mineral trace on the channel wall over many years. Its upper edge showed the ordinary range more generously than the brass gauge could. Nico compared the flowing surface with that trace. Aaron watched how a bay leaf traveled through the reach without catching. Suri stood on the footstone and listened to the note at the lower notch. Only after each had given an observation did Amara seat the gauge. The number agreed with all of them. That is almost disappointing, Tomas said. You wanted the gauge to object? Mira asked. A courteous difference of opinion would give it character. Amara dried the gauge and returned it to her satchel. Its character is accuracy within a narrow purpose. You see, Tomas said to Mira. She defends it like family. They continued along the head channel with Leela in front. She knew where rosemary roots pressed near the outer wall without disturbing it, where late shade kept a film of green on one footstone, and where a person carrying a full basket needed to cross on the upper side. At Three-Lip Divide, she yielded the lead to Nico. The 3 water notes met beneath the divider block. East was bright and quick. Center held a lower thread. West made the broadest sound, shallow over its lip, and fuller beyond. The system had settled after the whole branch test of the previous evening. The gate handles sat in their grooves. Chalk marks from the test remained on the dry stones, each beside a date and the initials of the person who had observed that branch. Nico checked the marks against his rotation board. The map shows the east gate opening from this side. Most people stand there. He pointed to the outer bank. But when the rosemary is tall, you cannot see the lip. I stand on the center stone. Is it safe for the paper to say so? Amara asked. Nico considered. The stone is broad and dry unless the center gate is being cleaned. We could show both places and say why. He spoke without waiting for her decision. Leela agreed about the seasonal obstruction. Tomas added that the center stone had been reset 2 winters ago and bore weight evenly. Amara drew a small open circle at each viewing point and let Nico write clear view when rosemary is high beside his. From the divide they followed the eastern branch into Saffron Steps. The name had outlasted the small saffron plot that once occupied its upper ledge. Thyme now grew there in gray-green cushions, with rosemary above and sage below. The channel descended beside the terraces in short level runs connected by small stone drops. Each drop took brightness from the sun and broke it into moving scales under the leaves. Leela walked slowly enough for the group to experience the branch as a sequence rather than a line. At the first terrace, she rubbed one thyme stem lightly between finger and thumb. Its scent was cool and faint. At the next drop, the sun had reached the wall. The same gesture released a warmer, almost peppery scent. Second gate, Nico said. Without counting walls, Leela replied. They found the gate beyond the warm thyme and checked its branch against the map. The bed labels agreed. The bypass groove was clear. A repaired corner Tomas had set early in the season showed no dampness along its outer seam. Amara added a tiny sun symbol beside Leela's scent note to show that it applied after morning light reached the wall. At the lowest sage bed, Leela passed the lead to Mira, whose route to the tea house crossed the service path toward Mint Bend more often than anyone else's. Mira chose a path Amara would not have selected for an inspection. It turned behind a wash courtyard, passed beneath 2 fig trees, and approached the central channel through a screen of leaves. The main path is shorter, Amara said. For people coming from the survey house, Mira replied. Half the village comes from the square. The water announced itself beneath the fig leaves with quick reflections on the pale courtyard wall. The channel itself remained hidden for another 6 paces. Mira stopped at the first silver flicker. If the wall stays still on a bright day, I ask Nico whether the branch is late, she said. I have never needed to know its depth from here. Amara looked from the moving light to the map. She added a small radiating mark at the courtyard wall. Her key had no symbol for reflected water. It had one now. Mint Bend waited in a pocket of coolness below. The channel curved around an old retaining stone, narrow and dark beneath leaning mint. Lemon balm occupied the inner bed. Even before they descended the last step, the layered scents changed. Mint sharp where feet brushed the path. Lemon balm soft and green beneath it. Wet limestone holding both. Nico took the lead again. He showed them the timing peg, the shallow groove that carried a garden turn, and the place where a leaf often circled once before choosing the outlet. The map showed the curve correctly, but placed the timing peg on the outer bank. It used to be there, Amara said. We moved it after the rainy week, Nico replied. The outer bank stayed soft. Aaron suggested the flat stone. Aaron pressed his heel against the new position. It does not lean now. Nico erased the old square and redrew it. The correction left a faint gray shadow, visible evidence that the map had changed because the channel keepers had. They watched one mint leaf circle and pass onward. No one timed it. The line toward Hearth's cistern ran beneath a lane for a short distance, and Thomas led them through the culvert's history with the pleasure of a mason describing work that had stayed put. He tapped the paving above the inlet, then the stones above the outlet. The first sounded compact, the second slightly more open because of the channel chamber underneath. Do not put that on the public map, Surrey said. Someone will spend every quiet afternoon tapping the lane. It would improve village percussion. It would improve your repair list. At Hearth Chistern, household morning use had ended. The broad stone basin held water just beneath its recovery line. A narrow overflow continued from the opposite side toward the lower connections. Surrey checked the bakehouse wall visible across the square, then the watermark. The second oven batch went in before we left, she said. Recovery is where I would expect it. Amara checked the gauge and found it so. She wrote the customary pause after heavy household draws beside the cistern symbol. Mira added the best place to stand without blocking pictures. Thomas drew the forgotten culvert. The page was becoming dense near the square, but it no longer assumed that every reader approached from the survey house. They paused for bread and cheese on the cistern wall. The tea Mira had carried in stoppered jars was warm, not hot, and tasted of mint with a little fennel seed. Cups passed from hand to hand. Below them, the village descended in green and white bands toward the sea. Their route remained visible in sections, never as a whole. Aaron led after the pause. He took them west through the lower garden connection, where the central overflow and the long branch related through 2 small settling pockets. The path narrowed between fennel taller than Nico's shoulder. Woven screens protected young stems from the strongest afternoon breeze. Aaron touched each screen as he passed, reading tension through his fingertips. At the minor bend, he lifted one hand. From within the wall came a low, regular talk-talk. Water speaking through the pocket under a limestone slab. Hollow stone, Mira said. She turned before the split alder came into view and found the narrow path behind the fennel. Everyone followed without looking for Amara's measured marker. The sound brought them exactly to the junction where the lower connection met Fennel Reach. Amara drew a firm line beneath Thomas's pencil note. Fennel Reach was long and shallow, more patient than dramatic. The channel crossed the western terraces and a nearly level run that distributed water through small clay-lipped openings. Frequent gate changes made its far end hesitate. A steady release allowed the whole reach to fill. Aaron showed them 3 places where surface shine revealed whether the release had arrived evenly. The first lay under open sky, the second appeared between fennel shadows, the third could be seen only by crouching beside a basket shelf and looking back uphill. Most new keepers stare at the far gate, he said. By the time that tells them anything, they have already changed the upper gate twice. What do you watch instead? Nico asked. Aaron pointed to a triangle of water trembling beneath 2 crossed stems. That. When it holds its shape, the far end is filling. Then I wait. Nico drew the triangle on a slip. Amara added customary pause, do not chase the far gate. The water continued toward Lavender End, where the terraces opened to the southern light. Lavender bushes stood in ordered rows on both sides of the final useful channel. Their flowers had mostly been cut, but the stems released a clean, dusty sweetness in the sun. Aaron checked the last garden opening. Mira compared the return spill with the color of the wet stone. Thomas pressed the retaining edge. Leela looked back uphill and confirmed that no upper bed had changed while the lower reach filled. At the end, the channel broadened and lost its constructed straightness. Water entered reed resting pool among reeds and rounded stones, settling before it seeped into the coastal ground. Insects made brief stitches of sound above the surface. A frog called once from the far edge, too distant to be beneath anyone's shoes. The planted basin was clear. No direct path had been omitted. Every branch relation agreed with the observed flow. 2 gate symbols needed moving, 1 bypass required adding, and the concealed culvert needed a dotted line. The changes were small enough to fit in pencil and important enough to keep. Amara stood at the lower edge with the map supported on Thomas's board. For the first time she could look at the sheet and know that every named reach had been checked not only by her route through it, but by the person who met it most often. She placed a small check beside reed resting pool. All water paths verified, she said. Nico looked back up the terraces. We still have the observations. Yes, Amara said. Now we learn how to put them where they can be found. They did not climb directly back to the survey house. The afternoon remained mild, and the map was already out on Thomas's board. Amara suggested that they return by the central and lower connections, stopping wherever a note required a symbol the key did not yet contain. Mira called this the second map of the same walk. At Reed Resting Pool, the first map had shown water entering, settling, and seeping onward. The second began with shade. Aaron moved a pencil across the green-washed edge of the basin to show where the reeds cast shadow in the morning and where the terrace wall protected the water late in the day. The shade affected which plants established themselves along the rim and how readily a keeper could see cloudiness. If you check from this side at dusk, he said, everything looks darker whether it is clear or not. The flat stone gives the truer view. Amara added an eye symbol to the key and marked the flat stone. Beside it, Mira wrote, "Look with light behind you." The map had possessed north, scale, fall, and direction. It had not possessed time of day except through rotation notes. Amara drew a half-sun and a small crescent, then paused. More symbols could make a map less useful as easily as too few. Would words be clearer? She asked. Surrey, who had been holding the herb sprig since Leela needed both hands at the pool, looked over her shoulder. Words are excellent when they say what they mean. A radical view, Thomas said, so they used short phrases when a symbol would require explanation. Morning shade, clear view before dusk. Listen after lifting. Amara made a separate field card for the few symbols that repeated often. An ear for a listening point, an eye for a useful view, a hand for a touch check, an open cup for a customary pause. Why a cup? Nico asked. Mira answered before Amara could. Because a pause long enough for tea is understood everywhere. Some of your pauses require a pot. Then draw a pot where patience is especially important. They settled on the open cup because it looked simple at small scale. At Lavender End, Aaron placed one beside the final garden gate. A keeper arriving immediately after release should wait there until the wet color reached the third pale stone. The pause was not a fixed number of minutes. It shortened slightly after rain and lengthened when fennel roots drew heavily. The stones and water answered the practical question better than a clock. Amara thought of all the times she had translated such pauses into expected intervals. The intervals remained useful for comparison across a season. They did not need to replace the thing observed. As they climbed beside Fennel Reach, each person tried following the new marks without explanation from the person who had offered them. Nico found Aaron's triangle of reflected water. Leela located the hollow stone by sound even while Sari and Thomas continued a conversation behind her. Mira used the cool hand mark to find a shaded outer wall where seepage would reveal itself before wetness became visible on the path. At that wall, the stone felt uniformly cool and dry. No seep, Mira said. Amara touched it after her. The check required no gauge and no special vocabulary. Anyone with an uncovered palm could make it. Genuine survey data, she said, mostly to herself. Thomas heard her. Did the stone pass its examination? The map did. I have treated observations like these as notes beside the survey. They are part of the survey. Leela tucked the rosemary sprig more firmly into its damp cloth. A measurement is also an observation. It merely arrives dressed for a meeting. Amara laughed, and the sound moved briefly ahead of them along the wall. At Hearth Cistern, they tested approach instructions. Suri went around the bakehouse side and read the recovery line from the position Mira had marked. Nico approached from Mint Bend and found the household overflow by its narrow bright line beneath the lip. Tomas came through the square and demonstrated the difference between ordinary water sounds and the soft drumming produced when the cistern was receiving a heavy upper flow. Children crossed the square carrying a hoop. 2 neighbors filled pitchers. A broom moved over paving. The cistern changed slightly with use, never becoming a still object for their convenience. Amara watched the map's marks prove themselves amid the ordinary movement. Suri returned from the bakehouse with a small piece of charcoal. There is one pause. Nobody has named. She drew a short bench against the square wall. When someone has walked down from Cloud Step and starts giving 3 instructions at once, they sit here before changing a gate. Is that customary? Amara asked. It will be, if necessary. Does the instruction apply to anyone in particular? Mira asked. Suri examined the charcoal. The map is communal. Amara left the bench on the sheet. It stood near the open cup symbol, an ordinary place to pause and look at the cistern while the system settled. Earlier in the season, she might have called it imprecise. Now she could name what it protected, a decision made after arrival but before attention had caught up. They turned toward Mint Bend. The day had warmed the upper paths, but the central curve remained cool. Mint brushed their ankles. Lemon balm breathed its softer scent from the inner bed. Nico asked Mira to close her eyes at the last fork and choose the channel path by smell. That seems unfair to the map, Mira said. But she did it. At the fork she turned left without hesitation. Mint first. Lemon balm after the low step. Nico marked the sequence. Amara added a note that strong wind could mix the scents and make the cue less dependable. Every local observation had conditions. So did every measurement, though instruments often hid theirs in neat tables. The listening channel beside the survey house joined the central branch just below Mint Bend. Amara had drawn it as a thin blue spur running through the back wall of her workroom. Thomas stopped at the junction. You call this the listening channel, he said. The map calls it a monitoring spur. Amara looked at her label. He was right. Change it, she said. Nico erased monitoring spur and wrote listening channel. The new words took more room. They also told a reader what to do there. They sat for a while on the low wall outside the survey house and sorted the notes by kind. Waterpath corrections formed one group. Recognition cues formed another. Customary pauses, branch responsibilities, and seasonal differences each had their own stack. Leela laid the matching herb sprig atop each scent note. The afternoon air around the wall became a layered garden. Rosemary resin, dusty sage, warm thyme, green mint, lemon balm, fennel, and the clean sweetness of cut lavender. Amara opened her field book to make a formal list, then saw Nico arranging the slips in an order that followed the water rather than her categories. He began with the smooth note at cloud step, moved through the upper measure's dark line, then placed warm thyme at saffron steps, reflected light on the fig wall, cool air at mint bend, the cistern bench, the hollow stone, Aaron's triangle, lavender on the return, and the viewing stone at the pool. Keep that order, she said. A reader will meet them that way. They walked the remaining ascent by those cues. At the hollow stone, the sound reached them before the visual marker. At the square, bread and fennel drifted from Surrey's open bakehouse door while the cistern stood at recovery level. Beneath the figs, light moved on the wall. At saffron steps, warm thyme confirmed the second gate. Each cue answered in its place. At the three-lip divide, they stopped for the longest customary pause. The branch notes held their relation. No gate needed moving. Leela poured the last of Mira's tea into 7 cups. It had cooled almost to the temperature of the spring water, and the mint tasted clearer for it. Amara spread the map on the divider stone. Measurements remained its bones, the slopes, structures, connections, capacities, and marks by which change could be compared. Around them now lay the knowledge that helped a person arrive, recognize, wait, and decide. Neither kind weakened the other. She drew the last symbol in the key and open hand, and beside it wrote, "Local observations belong to the map. Add date and keeper name when they change." The practical guide could now be read by a person carrying a gauge, a basket, a teapot, a loaf, or nothing at all. Before leaving the divide, Amara asked each of them to choose one reach. They did not usually tend and describe how the map would bring them there. It was a final test of whether local knowledge had truly become shared knowledge rather than a collection of private instructions. Surrey chose Cloud Step Spring. She began at the bakehouse, crossed the square, followed the central path past Mint Bend, and used the Rosemary Wall to find the upper ascent. From there, the head channel itself led to the settling bowl. She knew to listen for the smooth note before touching the screen and to compare the surface with the 2 lime marks. "And if the note is not smooth?" Leela asked. "I look for a needle or twig at the mouth. If I find nothing obvious, I leave the gate as it is and find you or another upper keeper." Leela nodded. The answer did not turn Surrey into an upper terrace specialist. It gave her enough understanding to notice usefully without making an uninformed change. Tomas chose Reed Resting Pool and described approaching with the evening light behind him, checking clarity from the flat stone, and remembering that frog calls were seasonal. Mira chose Fennel Reach, found the hollow stone in the sequence of directions, and named the reflected triangle as the reason to wait. Aaron chose Hearth Kistern and included both household recovery and the clear standing place beside the square. Nico chose Lavender End, following the lower branch past the patient release rather than treating it as an isolated final gate. Leela chose the listening channel and used its changed name naturally. When it was Amara's turn, she chose Saffron Steps. She could have recited every measured fall. Instead, she began with the cool thyme, walked in words until the herb warmed, and stopped at the second gate. No one had become replaceable. That was not the purpose. They had become reachable to one another through the record. Late afternoon light filled the survey house when they returned. It entered from both open windows, crossed above the listening channel, and rested in a broad honey-colored shape on the table. The tea things were where they had left them, Amara's cup held one cool mouthful. Suri's bowl contained 3 fennel biscuits and a scatter of crumbs. They washed their hands, weighted the map again, and began the careful work of making a traveled page into a finished record. Amara assigned no stations. Leela chose the upper reaches and began inking pencil corrections with a fine black pen. Thomas took the dotted culvert and structural symbols. Aaron copied lower terrace notes in his large, steady lettering. Mira refined the recognition key, making the ear, eye, hand, and cup distinct, even when small. Suri checked every public landmark against the paths people actually used. Nico sat beside Amara with the rotation board and wrote keeper names on a separate strip. Amara mixed blue ink in a shallow dish. The color needed to remain legible under lamplight without becoming so dark that it resembled a wall line. She tested 3 strokes on scrap paper. The third dried to the clear muted blue she wanted. Then she passed the pen to Nico. "Trace the moved timing peg and the mint bend garden turn," she said. He accepted it carefully. "You usually do the water lines. Today you moved that mark because you knew where it belonged. Your hand can finish it." He drew slowly at first. The paper grain pulled a little ink from the pen, making one edge uneven. He stopped. "It is still the correct channel," Amara said. Nico continued. By the end of the curve his stroke had settled. He added his initials in tiny letters beside the correction. The room took on the hush of useful concentration. Pens moved with faint scratches. Paper shifted under palms. Outside, feet passed on the lane and water kept its low sound in the stone trough. Herb sprigs on the sill warmed and released their scents. Mira reheated no tea. Everyone drank it cool when they remembered their cups. They worked first on the master sheet. Pencil corrections became ink. Unneeded marks were lifted gently with breadcrumb and a smooth eraser. Each edition received either a date, a keeper's initials, or a seasonal condition. Amara checked that no note covered the measured reference marks needed for future comparison. When the master was clean, Tomas placed 3 fresh sheets on his mason's board and fastened their corners with small wooden clips. The village did not own a press large enough for the map. They would make copies by laying thin paper over the master against the window, tracing the fixed lines, then transferring the local notes by hand. 3 copies, Suri said. 1 here, 1 in the square, 1 at the upper store. And branch cards, Nico added. 9 reach cards, Amara said. 1 for every named reach from Cloudstep Spring to Reed Resting Pool. The divide card includes all 3 outgoing branches. Thomas counted the names on his fingers. 9 reaches, 9 cards. Even a mason can defend that arithmetic. And 1 separate structure card for repairs across the system, Nico said. 10 cards altogether, Amara agreed. 9 for reaches, 1 for structure. They traced in pairs. 1 person held the sheet against the west window, while another followed the visible lines. Then they traded. Amara and Suri copied the first. Leela and Nico copied the second. Thomas and Aaron copied the third while Mira read notes aloud from the master. The process was slower than Amara's usual drafting and more companionable. Small differences appeared. Suri's terrace walls leaned very slightly toward the sea. Nico's reeds were careful upright strokes. Aaron's channel widened wherever his hand relaxed. None altered the map's meaning. Amara checked scales and junctions, not personality. When the fixed lines were complete, they laid all 4 maps across the table. The original occupied the center. Copies surrounded it like views of the same water under different light. They transferred the observations reach by reach. Mira read each phrase, the group confirmed it, and one of them wrote it on every copy. Smooth note before inspection. Dark line shows ordinary range. Warm time after sun reaches wall. First silver on the fig wall. Mint first. Lemon balm after the low step. Pause after 3 household buckets. Listen for the hollow stone. Wait for the reflected triangle. Lavender stronger on return. Look with light behind you. The phrases became more certain through repetition. By the fourth writing, they belonged to no single speaker. Nico cut 9 reach cards from stiff cream stock. Each card carried 1 reach name, the related upstream and downstream places, 2 or 3 recognition cues, the relevant keeper names, and a blank line for dated observations. Thomas cut a 10th card for structural repairs across the system. Aaron punched holes in their upper corners. Thomas threaded the holes with waxed cord. Leela matched all 10 cards to weatherproof wooden covers saved from the old rotation set. Amara wrote current keeper names from the strip. Leela at Cloud Step Spring, Upper Measure, and Saffron Steps. Nico at Three Lip Divide and Mint Bend. Suri and Mira as square observers at Hearth Cistern. Aren at Fennel Reach, Lavender End, and Reed Resting Pool. Tomas as repair contact for structural changes across all reaches. Her own name belonged under survey comparison and seasonal review, beside those of anyone trained to take the same readings. It did not sit at the top. She checked the cards for space. Each had room for 4 routine notes. Her first design had included boxes for every likely change she could imagine: rain, shade growth, root pressure, household festival use, gate wear, silt after wind, and repairs. The boxes had made the cards look complete before anyone used them. They had also left no room for the thing she had failed to imagine. Hook S4EOH, H Thort Start. Amara deliberately left a clean blank margin on the finished map. Nico watched her rule a line around 3 sides and lift the straight edge before closing the 4th. Did you miss the edge? No. She turned the shared flow map so everyone could see the open band of paper. The gardens would change. Shade would move, stones would settle, and neighbors would learn cues none of them knew today. A finished record had to remain useful through those gradual changes. Amara wrote 1 small instruction at the top of the margin. Future keepers add what helps the next person notice. She did not fill the space with predictions. She did not divide it into approved categories. The clean paper remained an invitation, wide enough for another hand, another season, and knowledge the present room could not supply. Then it is finished, because it has somewhere to continue, Nico said. Amara looked at the unmarked grain beside the blue channel lines. Yes, she said. That is exactly why. SOAHOHH02E end. They repeated the open margin on all 3 copies. Mira drew no decorative border around it. Tomas suggested no additional key. Suri placed 1 fennel biscuit at its edge, then ate the biscuit when Amara looked at her. Testing whether the space was truly available, she said. Amara left it available. As daylight thinned, they lit 2 lamps. Honey-colored circles took the place of the sun on the table. Ink shone briefly when wet and turned matte as it dried. The paper grain became more visible in the angled light. Shadows of moving hands crossed terraces and channels without obscuring them. They compared every copy to the master. Leela read place names from Cloud Step down. Nico followed each waterline with the blunt end of a pencil. Thomas checked structures. Aaron checked branch relationships and lower garden weights. Mira read sensory cues. Suri checked access notes and public locations. Amara verified scale, fall marks, dates, and the relation of every copied symbol to the key. At the hollow stone note, all 7 said present at once. At the listening channel, Nico found that the survey house copy alone used the old label beneath the new one. Amara lifted the last trace of monitoring spur and wrote listening channel cleanly. At Reed Resting Pool, Mira found 1 missing seasonal phrase. Aaron added frog cue in calling months. At the future margin, no one added anything. Mira then proposed what she called the lamplight test. She carried 1 copy to the far end of the room while Thomas lowered the wick of the second lamp. The map would often be read early or late, when terrace work began before full sun or an evening note arrived after supper. A symbol legible only at noon was not yet a useful symbol. One by one, they stood where a future reader might stand. The muted blue waterlines remained distinct from black walls. Dotted culverts could be distinguished from paths. The ear did not resemble a cup, though Thomas said this proved more about Mira's drawing than about ears or cups. Keeper names remained large enough to read. Only the pale green wash at reed resting pool vanished in the lower light. Aaron outlined the reeds with 3 sparse black strokes. The pool returned without becoming crowded. They also rolled and unrolled each copy around its cedar rod. No ink transferred. No corner buckled. Suri carried the square copy through the doorway beneath its cloth and returned without catching it on the jamb. Nico tied and untied each branch card cover with cold fingers after rinsing his hands at the trough. The waxed cords yielded without slipping loose. Amara recorded these checks on the back of the handover card, readable in low lamplight. Copies dry and portable. Branch covers accessible. All symbols matched to key. They were humble tests. None would appear as a mark on the public face of the map. Together they meant the finished artifact could survive actual use rather than merely look complete across a well-lit table. The 9 reach cards were checked against the maps, followed by the separate structure card. Each keeper name was current. Each related reach agreed. Each card had its cord and cover. Amara stacked the reach cards in root order, placed the structure card beneath them, and tied all 10 loosely with basket fiber. Finally, they signed the master along the lower edge. Not as owners, Amara wrote above the line, but as the people who had checked this version together. Leela signed first in her upright hand. Thomas made a broad T and a patient row of smaller letters. Nico's name climbed slightly. Mira's curved like steam. Aaron's looked woven. Suri added a tiny loaf beside hers. Amara signed last, the same size as the rest. 4 finished maps lay beneath the lamps. 1 master and 3 accessible copies. 9 covered reach cards and 1 covered structure card rested beside them. The ink was dry. The corrections had been checked. The keeper names were attached. No copying remained for morning. Amara washed the blue pen until the water in the cup ran clear. Ready for handover, she said. They carried the maps and evening beneath clean cloth covers. Thomas bore the square copy on his board. Leela and Nico carried the upper store copy rolled loosely around a cedar rod. Aaron held the survey house copy and the packet of branch cards. Amara carried the signed master. The village square had entered the hour between work and supper. Shop shutters stood half closed. A broom leaned against the tea house wall. Lamps glowed in 2 windows but had not yet been lit along the lanes. Hearth cistern received the blue of the open sky and returned a darker blue beneath its rim. A cedar notice case waited under the square arcade. Thomas had repaired its hinges that morning. Its glass front lifted upward and the backing board had been lined with dry woven mat so paper would not rest directly against stone. The case could be opened without a key during daylight. At night, a simple wooden pin held the front shut against wind. Amara removed the cloth from the square copy. Several neighbors paused on their way across. No announcement had been arranged, but a finished map on a mason's board had the quiet power of bread emerging from an oven. People noticed and came nearer. Nico fixed the copy inside the case with broad paper corners. He did not pierce the sheet. Mira placed the recognition key beside it. Suri added a small card in plain lettering, shared flow map. Read here or ask at the tea house for the table copy. Add routine notes on the rotation board. Report structural changes to any listed keeper. Any listed keeper, Amara repeated. That is what we agreed, Suri said. It is. I like hearing it. They attached the hearth cistern branch card beneath the map. Mira showed 2 neighbors how the ear and open cup symbols worked. One recognized the cistern bench immediately. Another pointed to the bread and fennel note and looked toward Suri. A technical standard, Suri said. A fragrant one, Leela replied. Amara formally handed the square copy to Mira and Suri as public stewards. The phrase sounded grander than the act. She placed one hand beneath the map board. They placed theirs beside it. And then all three let the cedar corners hold the paper. Yet the small ceremony mattered. The map was not on loan from the survey house. It belonged where people filled pictures, crossed paths, and asked questions. Nico turned to the rotation board. A narrow slate strip beside the day's water turns had been cleared for routine observations. He read the map, looked at the cistern recovery line, and wrote, Evening ordinary recovery after shared map walk. Central overflow clear. N. Say. He did not look at Amara before writing. He did not hold out the chalk for approval afterward. He set it back in its groove and explained the note to the neighbor nearest him. Amara felt the old impulse to compare his wording with the field book form. It rose, familiar and precise, then passed without requiring action. His note named the time, the condition, the observation, and the keeper. It was useful. More importantly, he knew why it was useful. First note, Mira said. Nico glanced at the clean band on the map. Not in the future margin yet. This is routine. Correct, Amara said. He smiled at her, pleased but not relieved. They walked next to the upper terrace store. The path climbed past the fig courtyard, mint bend, and saffron steps. Evening cooled the herbs in layers. Thyme lost its sun-warmed sharpness. Rosemary held warmth longer in its woody stems. Mint rose cleanly wherever a hem brushed it. The group no longer stopped to verify. They were placing a record already verified. The upper store stood beneath the last rosemary wall, a whitewashed room used for hand tools, dry screens, spare clay gate pieces, and terraced ledgers. Leela opened its broad door. Inside, the air smelled of wood, dried sage, and limestone dust. They hung the upper copy in a second cedar case above the ledger shelf, low enough for Nico to read without lifting his chin. The Cloud Step spring card and the upper measure card hung on neighboring pegs by the spring screens. The Saffron Steps card hung with the terrace tools. The three-lip divide card stayed in a covered slot near the door because its keepers approached from several directions. Leela signed the store ledger, received shared flow map, current version, checked from spring to resting pool. Nico added the date. Amara handed the rolled copy to Leela, then stepped back while Leela placed it. Accessible from first light, Leela said. If the store is closed, the key hangs at my courtyard. And the square copy remains available, Nico added. There was no single locked location whose keeper could make the knowledge inaccessible by sleeping late, visiting family, or simply being elsewhere. They descended to the survey house by a path blue with dusk. Its door stood open, the two lamps still burning within. The master map lay on the table. The listening channel made the same low sound it had made throughout their copying. Indifferent to whether it had been represented well, Aaron hung the survey house copy in the wall case opposite the gauges. Unlike the older technical drawings rolled in pigeonholes, this one could be read without asking Amara to retrieve it. Thomas tested the case latch. Mira placed a sharpened pencil and a small stack of dated note slips in the tray beneath it. They distributed the remaining reach cards. Mint Ben's card hung beside the listening channel on the peg by the back door. Her Cistern's card went in the square note box. Fennel Reach and Lavender End went with Aaron's woven rain covers. Reed Resting Pool's card would stay in the lower tool shelter. Tomas kept the separate structure card listing repair observations and the locations of common stone, clay, and fiber supplies. Amara opened the map cabinet. The signed master went in the wide, shallow drawer with no fold in it. The drawer was not locked. On its label, Nico wrote, Shared Flow Map signed Master Current Season. Beneath that he listed the 3 copy locations. If this house is closed? Amara asked. Square copy, Mira said. if the square case is being repaired. Upper store, Leela said. If I am away when a routine note is made. The keeper records it, Nico said. If two observations disagree. Both are dated, Aaron said. We look together before changing anything. If a wall moves, someone finds me before it becomes philosophical, Tomas said. Suri folded the cloth covers. If everyone is hungry, we go to the bakehouse, Amara said. The system is complete. They stood around the table one last time. Amara read the handover statement she had written on a single card. The map had been checked at every named reach. Corrections and shared observations had been incorporated. Copies had been placed at the square, survey house, and upper terrace store. Branch cards had been attached or delivered. Keeper names were current. Routine notes belonged to the named keepers. Seasonal survey comparison could be performed by Amara or another trained neighbor. Future changes should be dated and added where useful. She had once written a longer version containing procedures for procedures. This one fit on the card. Each person confirmed their part. Leela accepted the upper reaches. Nico accepted the divide, mint bend, and rotation notes. Mira and Suri accepted square access and household observations. Aaron accepted the lower reaches. Thomas accepted structural reports. Amara accepted seasonal comparison without claiming routine approval. Then she placed the handover card in the open tray beneath the displayed map. The shared flow map is handed over, she said. Mira lifted the card and read the statement once more, this time as one of the people receiving it. At each responsibility she looked toward the named keeper, not toward Amara. Leela answered for the upper reaches. Aaron answered for the lower. Suri rested 2 fingers on the survey house tray when the public access points were named. Thomas confirmed that structural notes could begin with any keeper and travel to him without passing through a separate approval. Nico turned the card over and read the practical tests listed on its back. And if someone learns a new cue tomorrow, a routine cue goes on the branch card first, Mira said. If it proves useful across a season, we add it to the map margin with a date. Who decides that it proved useful? Aaron answered. The people using the reach compare what they noticed. Nico nodded. The exchange required nothing from Amara. The handover was already functioning in the room where it occurred. Suri took the pencil from the tray and wrote the date beneath the statement. Then she passed it around. Each keeper placed a small initial beside the responsibility accepted. Amara initialed seasonal comparison last. Mira returned the card to its tray. Face outward, where anyone entering the survey house could read both the work completed and the hands now carrying it. No task followed the sentence. No copy remained unplaced. No signature absent. No reach unchecked. No card waiting for a keeper. The season's practical work ended in a room that still contained people talking softly and putting pencils away. Suri distributed the last 3 fennel biscuits by breaking each in half. Mira extinguished 1 lamp, because 1 was enough. Thomas took his mason's board. Leela wrapped the herb sprigs to carry home. Aaron coiled the unused basket fiber. Nico checked the rotation board once through the window, not for permission but because he was passing it on his way to supper. They left in 2s and 1s. Their goodnights moved down the lane. Amara did not call anyone back. 1 lamp remained on the survey house table. Its circle of light did not reach the far shelves. The gauges there were narrow gleams against shadow. The displayed map held a soft cream color behind glass, its blue channels subdued but readable. Beneath it, the blank future margin looked neither empty nor unfinished. It looked quiet. Amara stood alone beside the table and listened to the channel pass through the room. The handover was complete. She did not repeat the statement aloud. She could feel completion in the absence of the next required movement. She carried the cups to the washstand. A skin of mint leaf clung to the bottom of her cup. She rinsed each one, dried it, and stacked it on Cerie's tray. She wiped crumbs from the table into her palm. She capped the black and blue ink, returned the pens to their wooden box, and folded the blotting cloths. At the map cabinet, she opened the shallow drawer once. The signed master lay flat within it. 7 names crossed the lower edge. The clean margin weighted along one side. Amara read none of the notes. She closed the drawer without checking the copies against it again. Her gauges still needed cleaning after the day's route. That work belonged to the end of every completed survey, and she welcomed its familiar limits. At the stone trough, she rinsed the folding gauge, the brass probe, and the 2 marked clips they had used at the cistern. Water moved over her fingers, cool and steady. She dried each tool with linen, touched a trace of oil to the gauge hinge, and hung it on its peg. The field books went into their ordinary pigeonhole. The old draft slips went into the reuse tray with their blank sides upward. She found one small pencil note reading "Ask who leads after saffron steps." The question had been answered by the walk itself. She set the slip with the others. Only blank paper went behind the cabinet door. Fresh map sheets, branch cardstock, and a narrow roll for gauge tables stood in their labeled places. Amara turned the key and put it on its hook. She locked away no completed knowledge, only clean material waiting for future work. Outside, the square lamp came on. Its light entered the survey house as a small, pale bar across the floor. Someone laughed near the tea house. A pan touched a bakehouse shelf. Then the village sounds softened into evening. Amara lowered the east shutter and left the west one open. She swept the center of the room, not the whole room twice. She checked the lamp wick, not the ink. She looked at the displayed map once, not at every reach. The paper grain showed beneath lamplight. Different hands occupied the same sheet. Leela's warm thigh note stood above Mira's reflected light mark. Tomas's hollow stone sat beside Aaron's patient pause. Nico's moved timing peg connected cleanly to Amara's measured channel. Suri's bench waited beside hearth cistern. None of those marks asked to be made identical. She took her shawl from the door peg and extinguished the lamp. Darkness entered gently. The open west window held a piece of blue night. The channel remained audible. Amara closed the window, stepped outside and locked the survey house door. Through the glass case beside it, the public copy inside the room could still be seen from the lane during daylight. Tonight it rested beyond reading. Nothing needed to be read tonight. She walked toward the square without her satchel. The absence of its weight altered her step. She had carried it on so many rounds that her shoulder expected the strap. Her right hand lifted once as if to settle it, found only the edge of her shawl and fell again. At the square, one lamp hung beneath the arcade. It illuminated the cedar map case and the upper half of hearth cistern. The lower basin remained in blue shadow. Nico's routine note was a pale line of chalk on the board. Amara could have crossed to read it again. She remembered every word and kept walking. Mira was stacking the last tea house chairs. Suri stood in the bakehouse doorway with flour on one sleeve. Neither called her over. Mira lifted one hand. Suri lifted her chin toward the lane home. Their good nights contained no question about the map. Amara paused at the cistern bench because it was there. The stone had released the day's warmth. She sat until she could distinguish the central overflow beneath the distant cups and doors. Water entered, balanced, and continued. A household pitcher disturbed the surface somewhere beyond the lamp's reach. The basin recovered by degrees too small to demand watching. She rose when she wished, not after a measured interval. The path from the square to Mint Bend was one she could have walked with her eyes closed. Tonight she did not count steps. She did not note the time at the first turning or compare the coolness beneath the fig leaves with the air at the square. The wall held no reflected water in darkness. Its pale surface gathered lamplight for a little way, then became gray. her route passed the survey house from below. The closed building made no claim on her. Through its wall, the listening channel joined the branch and traveled toward Mint Bend. She followed because it was also the path home, and because walking beside water was pleasant. Mint rose where her skirt brushed the edge of the bed. Lemon balm lay softer beneath it. Farther uphill, thyme and rosemary had blended into the dry, deep scent of night terraces. Lavender reached her only when the breeze turned from the south. The whole village map could be encountered in those scents, though no one smelled them all from one place. At Mint Bend, the last lane lamp hung from a whitewashed corner. Its light touched the upper stones of the curve and one moving strip of water. Beyond it, the channel passed under leaning leaves into darkness. Amara left the path and sat on the low stone beside the listening channel. The place was close enough to home that she could see the faint glow at her kitchen shutter through the trees. She did not go there yet. The day's warmth remained in the top of the stone. Its side was cool against her palm. Water rounded the bend with a narrow whisper, caught briefly at the shallow groove, and moved on. Once, a mint leaf entered the light. It turned at the curve, showed its pale underside, and crossed into shadow. Amara did not follow its time. She thought of the 4 maps resting in separate places. The signed master lay flat in the unlocked drawer. The survey house copy faced the gauges. The upper copy waited among tools and terrace ledgers. The square copy stood where anyone crossing for water could read it. 9 reach cards waited near the hands that would use them, and Thomas held the separate structure card. Nico's first routine note already existed without her approval. Tomorrow, someone might consult the warm thyme cue. A week from now, Aaron might date a change at Fennel Reach. In another season, a keeper not yet named might write in the open margin. Those acts did not extend today's task. They belonged to the working life the task had been meant to serve. The distinction settled in her as quietly as silt in a resting bowl. She remembered the first mornings of the season, when a renewed channel note had seemed to ask for one more adjustment, simply because she could still imagine one. Since then, the village water had offered her variations on the same patient lesson. A repair could belong to the hand that shaped it differently. A rotation could remain clear when another keeper carried it. Rain could choose the pace of work. Downstream evidence could improve an elegant plan. Neighbors could compare sounds and surfaces until their judgment held. A whole system could balance through broad signals rather than one person walking every branch. The map gathered those lessons without naming them. Its waterlines were precise, but not solitary. Its notes were useful, but not final. Its copies rested apart from one another, making the same knowledge available from different approaches. The open margin did not diminish what they had completed. It let completion be generous. Amara leaned back enough to see a small square of sky between the mint leaves. No cloud crossed it. No weather needed considering. The darkness was simply evening, and the channel's steady movement was simply water taking the fall available to it. Knock Hawk. S4E08H03. Dart, Meehan the last lamp. The channel continued where Amara could no longer see it. The shared map was complete, signed, copied, and handed over. Every reach had been checked. The square case, upper store, and survey house each held the record. The keepers held their cards. No season work remained for her to finish. Amara rested beside the home channel at Mint Bend. Lamplight touched one curve of water and stopped. Past that small brightness, the current traveled by gravity through leaves and stone, toward neighbors who knew its sounds, its pauses, and its needs. A mint leaf appeared in the light and turned once on the slow inner current. Its pale underside flashed, then dulled as it crossed the rim of brightness. On other nights, Amara might have counted the turn or watched for the moment it reached the listening groove. Tonight she let the leaf go where the channel carried it. In darkness, the steady note still held the shape of a path she did not need to walk. She listened without following. A low ripple passed the listening groove. diminished under the mint, and joined the darkness. She felt no need to rise, measure it, or learn where that particular sound ended. The water continued. Her neighbors would continue with it. Amara drew her shawl around her shoulders and trusted both. Ekel ux 4 wrote. H through Z wrote. H through 3, H through 3, En. The lane lamp burned lower. Its honey-colored edge withdrew from the far stone and then from the nearest mint leaves. The channel did not grow silent when it became invisible. If anything, darkness made its note simpler. Amara rested her hands open in her lap. There had been a time when the end of a full survey left her mind traveling backward, from the resting pool to Lavender End, from Fennel Reach to the cistern, from Mint Bend to the Divide, from the Divide to the Upper Measure and Spring. She would revisit every gate and ask whether stability had lasted after she passed. Tonight the reaches came to her not as questions, but as places held in many people's knowledge. Cloudstep belonged to Leela's patient listening before inspection. The Upper Measure belonged to the dark line, the gauge, and every eye trained to compare them. Saffron Steps warmed its time in morning sun. Nico knew the Divide from the center stone and Mint Bend from its circling leaves. Hearth Kistern lived among pitchers, bread scent, Mira's clear view, and Surrey's bench. Aaron waited for the triangle at Fennel Reach. Lavender cooled after dusk. The reeds held the last water without needing to send word uphill. Amara knew those things. She no longer needed to be the only place where they met. A door closed softly below. Evening insects worked beneath the channel murmur. From the square came one last indistinct thread of conversation, then quiet. The kitchen glow behind the trees remained steady. Nothing in the quiet felt abandoned. The square map had been left where morning hands would find it. The upper store held another beside the tools that shaped the terraces. Behind the locked survey house door, a copy waited in plain view, and the sign master rested in its openable drawer. Separation had not scattered the record. It had rooted it in the places where questions would arise. Amara pictured no one in particular reading it. Perhaps a grower would trace the blue line with a soil-darkened finger. Perhaps a child would recognize the hollow stone before understanding a fall mark. Perhaps Thomas would add a repair date, or Mira would carry a new scent observation from the tea house, or Nico would decide that an ordinary note belonged only on the board and nowhere more permanent. The map could receive each use without requiring her presence beside it. That was not an absence she needed to fill. It was room she had helped make. She sat until the stone's stored warmth faded. There was no completion mark for that, no agreed interval. At some point she noticed her shoulders had lowered. At another she tasted the last cool trace of mint tea, though the cup had long been washed and stacked. A moth moved through the weak edge of lamplight, vanished, and returned once before choosing the dark garden. Amara heard the soft rasp of mint leaves touching in the breeze. Beneath them, water crossed a small roughness in the channel bed, its note brightening for 3 breaths and lowering again. She knew the stone that made it. She did not need to put the knowledge anywhere tonight. From her kitchen, the faint glow at the shutter went out. Surrey must have stopped there earlier to light the lamp and leave bread, as she sometimes did after a long survey. Or perhaps the glow had belonged to a reflection from the lane and had faded when the lamp lowered. Amara let both explanations remain possible. Home was only a short walk away in either case. When she stood, she placed one palm on the wall. The stone was cool and dry, an ordinary observation, useful if needed, pleasing even when it was not. She walked the short remaining path home. Behind her, the last lamp at Mint Bend became a pale blur through leaves and then disappeared. The channel accompanied her for several steps, crossed beneath the lane and went another way. Amara did not turn after it. At her door, she paused only to breathe the night scents gathered from the terraces. Then she entered, left the window open to the sound of water, and set no gauge beside it.